Yes, my name's Elizabeth Brooke. I'm Senior Project Curator at Tate and Curator of this exhibition. Not only is this the largest exhibition of Turner paintings that Tate has ever loaned, it's also uniquely intersected by artworks by a series of 15 contemporary artists. The addition of the contemporary artist is intended to highlight Turner's enduring relevance. It shows how the paintings he was making over 200 years ago are still so relevant to the dialogues that artists are entering into today. So the exhibition starts with Turner's early paintings in the British landscape, and it ends with late Turner. But in between, we've got the historical sublime, we've got Venice, we've got the Alps, we've got the sea, which were key themes that Turner followed across his life. So we've kind of used these contemporary connections, but to also tell the full story of Turner's career. So we begin the exhibition in the night. When Turner was inviting visitors to his own galleries, he would first ask them to wait in a darkened room so their eyes could adjust. And when they entered his galleries, they would be even more dazzled by the effects of his luminous paintings. Not only is it a play on that anecdote about Turner, but this section is a good spot to show off a really key pairing in the exhibition, centered around the moon. It really exemplifies Turner's approach to sublime. Turner's lunarscapes really exemplify his beautiful, luminous approach to colour and light and atmosphere. This painting here with the moon's delicate reflection on the water is such a sublime image, but it's also a really good example of Turner's interest in science. Here you can see a large, what appears to be a star, which is actually Jupiter. Contemporary astrologers have been able to verify the exact dates that this painting was made because of the positioning of Jupiter in relation to the moon. This links us to our first connection in the exhibition, to Katie Patterson's Totality. The world's most relaxing disco ball. There is over 10,000 mirrored images of every solar eclipse that's been recorded by human civilization since 1878. If you look closely, you'll be able to see the eclipses as they progress around. Turner was born in 1775, and this work has every solar eclipse dating back to 1778. So there's some moons on here that would have been in the sky when Turner was 3 years old, and perhaps he looked at them too. The pairing between Turner and Katie Patterson is that these are two artists that produce beautiful things that fill our hearts with wonder and are so sort of evocative and atmospheric, but they're also very much rooted in science. So the first section of the exhibition begins in the British landscape. Over here we have an unusually portrait picture of a landscape entitled Morning Amongst Coniston Fells, which features a scene from the English Lake District. I've stood in the very spot that this painting was made, and I've felt the experience of this view, and Turner captures that sublime experience perfectly. Other works in this section of the exhibition include a series of Turner's early paintings in Wales, which are featured along this wall. They're paired with a stone circle by the landscape artist Richard Long. The stones in this circle were foraged in the same place that the paintings that Turner made of Wales were depicted, but the two artists have completely different approaches to how they record their environment. For Turner, he would go into nature, make these sketches and colour studies, and go back to his studio and then through a synthesis of his sort of records and his own imagination, he would create these beautiful atmospheric pictures. Whereas for Richard Long, the experience of actually entering the landscape was the artwork itself. The stones here that were foraged in the landscape are the record in the gallery space. Likewise, we've got some materials by Richard Long on the wall over here. These exist as artifacts of the performative experience of Long entering the landscape and walking through, and being immersed in nature is really the direct artwork. So whilst both artists have a very different technique and a very different sort of system, Richard Long's work is very sort of almost clinical and process-led, whereas Turner's is imaginative and romantic. But both of them, the experience of being in nature is essential to their work, that experience of directly spending time in the natural environment. So the next section of this exhibition takes us to the Alps. It's entitled Into the Mountains. It includes works from his first trip to the Alps. Along this wall here, there's a section of works which feature some extremely rocky, difficult terrains, and you can imagine in 1802 what a treacherous journey it would have been for Turner to get to these places to record this scenery. In the paintings you can see there's some little details of sort of traces of humans and nature. There's the sort of the bridge and the horses, people walking along the track, and Turner liked to include these sort of small, he often referred to them as bits of litter in his paintings that sort of allowed us to better associate ourselves with the environment and place ourselves into the picture, highlighting the sort of insignificance of man against the vastness of nature. Over here we have two studies of glaciers by Turner. Turner would have had to actually climb onto the glacier in order to make this study, which is incredible to think. And we've paired these glacier works with a contemporary series called Glacier Melt series by Olafur Eliasson, which features a series of photographs of glaciers 20 years apart. And it shows the devastating impact of climate change on what for Turner was this huge, powerful, almost unstoppable force of a mountainous environment that had this sort of overwhelming power over humankind. And we're starting to see here, well, we are seeing here the sort of devastating effects that humankind is actually having on nature today. Here we have a painting called The Fall of the Avalanche in the Grisons. Turner never saw an avalanche. He had read about them, but he hadn't actually experienced one directly. And of course, to be able to paint an avalanche from this perspective, he would almost certainly be dead. It wouldn't be possible to get out of an avalanche sort of falling towards you like this alive. And for me, this is a perfect explanation of the concept of the sublime. The avalanche is an astonishing thing to look at. You can see its power and its force, but it's also incredibly beautiful. Whereas if we were stood in the face of this avalanche in nature, then it would be a completely horrifying thing and we would be scared for our lives. So the sort of separation of being able to look at it in the gallery allows us to sort of experience it removed and experience the awe and wonder of this natural phenomenon. I also took the opportunity in this section of the exhibition to explore Turner's use of colour, his extremely bold use of colour, and often unexpected. So whilst these are mountainous landscapes, they include oranges, yellows, greens, blues, pinks. Certainly not colours that you would associate with the mountains, but they ring true because when you've been in that sort of landscape, the way that the sun reflects off snow, there's all sorts of colour effects. So it's like it's a sort of exaggerated version of what we see, and it helps, again, sort of place ourselves in that environment and reminds us of those sensations. We've connected these works to a large-scale painting by Peter Doig, who is also really interested in this sort of sense of nostalgia and memory that snow can ignite. There's few people in Europe, certainly in Western Europe, that won't have experienced snow of some kind. So most of us can kind of connect ourselves to an experience of snow and imagine that whilst these colours are untrue, that sensation that they're evoking. So this section of the exhibition, it begins with some of Turner's first paintings that he made when he visited the Alps in 1802. His journeys to the Alps were limited for a period of time by the Napoleonic Wars, but he returned to the Alps regularly throughout his life and right up towards the end of his career. So we end the section of the exhibition with one of his later Alpine paintings, which is almost purely elemental. You can vaguely make out a hut here and the sort of mountain tops, but it's really an extremely sort of atmospheric and elemental experience of the Alps. So next we enter the historical sublime. This section of the exhibition includes some of the sort of more traditionally themed paintings by Turner. Classical themes such as mythology and religion are the subjects of the paintings, but really they're not the protagonists. The landscape behind and the scenery are where Turner's true interest lied. Here you can see this sort of very classical landscape composition with the winding river, but the sort of haze and atmosphere that is so characteristic of Turner is the thing that is the sublime element of this picture. The figures in the painting are sort of almost a second thought. If you look at them closely, they're not particularly well painted, especially when you see the Bacchus painting down here. It's really the luminosity and the atmosphere that is the star of the show. Turner really was using these paintings to show off his skills and his brilliant application of sort of colour and contrasting light. So this picture of Apollo and Python, you can see Apollo here and a Python here and Python here. It's a classic story of good triumphing over evil, but we have the small snake in the corner, which reminds us that new evils are never far away and that the battle for good is always ongoing. But the sort of the brightness of Apollo versus the darkness of Python, the sort of the way that the branches direct us up to the sky, it's all just Turner showing his skills at his best. Alongside the historical sublime section, we have an installation by contemporary artist Cornelia Parker. It contains fragments of canvas from Turner's own paintings. They'd been in Tate stores for several years, and I think nobody was really sure what to do with them. They are discarded bits of canvas, but of course you couldn't throw away a part of one of Turner's paintings, so they'd sort of just been in a corner and nobody did really touch them. And Parker came and did some research in the galleries and was really intrigued by the sort of status of these fragments, and decided that she would transform them into archive materials in their own right. So they've been sort of framed and displayed in a grand cabinet, and it really makes us question our sort of value systems that we have for paintings, especially in contrast to the extremely grand history paintings which you see in the adjacent room. Next we move into the Venice section of the exhibition. It was a bit of a cheat to include Venice in an exhibition that's about nature because of course it's a city. However, it's a city that exists very much on the edge of nature. It's right on the water, and you can see why Turner was so attracted to the city with its huge skies and beautiful reflections. And it's attracted so many artists for generations since. It was a section that we were very spoilt for choice in terms of which contemporary artists we should include. We chose to include this series of prints by Howard Hodgkin, which captures Venice at different times of the day. It's actually the first time these prints have ever been shown from Tate's collection, so we're extremely delighted to see them on the walls, and they look absolutely stunning. But they also allow a really poignant connection to Turner's watercolours. The series of watercolours that are included in this vitrine also capture Venice at different times of day. Turner returned to Venice several times over the years, but he would also paint the same scenes several times over at different times of day. He was so fascinated by the changing light and how the different times of day affected the atmosphere of Venice. There's two paintings here which also do the same thing. They are capturing Venice at different times of day. This painting is in the style of Canaletto, and it depicts the Bridge of Sighs with the palace on one side and the prison on the other. Turner was really interested in this sort of this relationship of the sort of grandeur of the palace and the prison sharing the same bridge. And one of the paintings that he presented at the Royal Academy that features this bridge, he included a quote by Blake, focusing on this sort of idea that there's the palace on the one side and the prison on the other. And we link this work to the Lord Provost exhibition, which is also sort of exploring the underbelly of Venice. You're taken on this sort of bizarre journey that's a synthesis of imagination and reality. You're not really sure which part of it is real and which isn't. And for me, it's a really interesting relationship between this and Turner's own sort of journeys and how he added his own imagination to his works. So the next section of this exhibition is one of two sections which are about the sea. Over half of Turner's body of work was about the sea, so we thought that we could allow two sections of the exhibition to focus on it. The first section of the exhibition is entitled Storm at Sea, and it thinks about that again in two different ways. So over here we have two paintings by Turner of rough sea. You can see how his sort of expressive brushwork and bold painting style and his bold use of colours and high energy lend themselves so perfectly to painting a seascape like this. We've paired them with a contemporary work by artist Jessica Warboys, who physically paints with the sea. So she takes her canvases into the water and adds the pigments and allows the sea's energy to work them into the paintings. And there's a remarkable similarity between the energy in her canvases and the seascapes that Turner made. The other component of this section of the exhibition is about political turbulence at sea. So here we have a photograph by Batinsky which shows an oil spill just off the Gulf of Mexico. We also tackle other sort of difficult political themes relating to the sea in this section. This painting is one of three that Turner made about the whaling industry. It's got this beautiful glowing luminosity, but really the subject of the exhibition is quite horrific, and you can see the sort of butchery of the whale there. This links to a film work by the artist Joanna Comfra, which also reflects on the horrors of the whaling industry. But intersects this with also footage of the African migrant crisis and other sort of seascapes. It's a complicated work because whilst it's got some really horrific themes and subject matter, it's also incredibly beautiful, and it sort of it prompts you to reflect on our complicated relationship with the sea. It's this immense, powerful force. We've got so much political history and baggage that links to the sea with the slave trade and other atrocities right up to current day with the migrant crisis. So the penultimate section of the exhibition is another section that is about sea and sky. So whilst we had the rough sea in the previous section, this is a more tranquil, contemplative look at bodies of water. This doesn't mean to say that there's not also some complicated themes. Here we have a large-scale photographic work by artist Wolfgang Tillmans, which, like the Akomfra film, also references the migrant crisis. I first saw this work in 2015, which was when the crossings across the British Channel were at the height of the news, and I stood in front of this painting in the gallery space and felt completely overwhelmed. You really get that sense of sort of endless sea and that sort of great unknown that lay in front of these people that were making this treacherous journey. We've paired this work with a particularly intriguing painting in this section of the exhibition by Turner. It's quite unassuming and small scale. It's called Study of Sea and Sky, Isle of Wight. It's incredibly unusual for its time for a few reasons. Firstly, there's nothing except the sea in the image. It's typically a seascape. You would expect to see some other sort of scenery or objects of interest within the scene, but Turner has completely painted the sea on its own. Additionally, we are pretty certain that this was painted at sea. This picture was made on a boat. It's part of a series of 7 paintings that were made on the same roll of canvas, and other paintings in the series feature the sort of interior of a boat, and we can see the position that he would have been sat at whilst he made this image. Painting en plein air was unheard of until the Impressionists, so the fact that Turner was doing this then is extraordinary. Here we have some photographs of the Thames by artist Ronnie Horn. So we're moving into the sea and more tranquil sort of waters. And no Sublime exhibition would be complete without the Blue Rigi. Potentially Turner's one of Turner's most well-known pictures, and potentially one of the most important watercolours in the world. The beauty, the luminosity, the serene atmosphere of this painting is Turner at its absolute best. It's such a stunning work and really the focal point of this section of the exhibition. Alongside this, we have some contemporary works by the artist Lisa Milroy, which are about sky. When painting a cloud, of course, clouds move and reform so quickly, it's impossible to paint it directly. You can only paint a cloud from memory. So really, when we're looking at Lisa and Turner's paintings of the sky, we're looking at their memories of the sky rather than the sky itself. Which leads us to think about this Turner quote, "My business is to paint what I see, not what I know is there." The final section of the exhibition is a chapel which is honouring Turner's late paintings. These paintings were not considered to be finished during Turner's lifetime. Whilst we can look at these works as finished paintings today, they would have been heavily criticised if they had been shown publicly in Turner's day. However, the sheer number of these supposedly unfinished works that were found in Turner's studio suggests that he'd worked them up to a point where he was happy with the level that they were at. They exist as purely elemental depictions of light and atmosphere. And really that was what interested Turner the most. So this picture, entitled Stormy Sea with Dolphins, it's a seascape, but it again includes pinks, reds, yellows, purples, blues, greens. It's not colours that you would expect to see in a landscape like this. And if you look closely, then you can see some of the dolphins hiding in the picture. There are two contemporary interventions in this section of the exhibition. One of them is by the artist James Turrell. It's entitled Raymar Blue. It's a purely elemental presentation of light, and I'm sure if Turner could see this work today, he would be in awe of it. I think it's something that he would potentially like to do himself if the technology had been there at the time. The second contemporary intervention in this section is a painting by Mark Rothko. There's a famous Rothko quote, "This man Turner learnt a lot from me." Rothko first saw Turner's work when it was displayed at MoMArt in the 60s, which was an extraordinary and unprecedented thing to exhibit a solo show by a painter in a modern art gallery when the painter had died over a century before. But Rothko was so taken by Turner's late paintings that he actually decided to bequeath his Seagram murals to the Tate collection so that they could permanently reside alongside Turner's work. So we paired the Rothko painting alongside a particularly intriguing work by Turner entitled Three Seascapes. You can see the three lines of sea. The top one is upside down and shares a sky with the second. So there's two bits of sky. Turner was known to take rolls of canvases and make multiple pictures on his roll of canvas that was then easier to transport. However, it would never have really been workable to then cut this canvas up into individual paintings without breaking one of the seascapes. Of course, Turner never did break the painting into its sections, and we'll never know whether this was because he liked it the way it was or what. Turner's works comprise almost half of Tate's collection. There's 35,000 works by Turner in our collection, so it's such a privilege to have access to this work, but it also highlights just how prolific Turner was. There's a famous quote by Turner, "The secret to genius is hard work," and that's certainly shown by the sheer volume of works by Turner that we have in Tate's collection. It's really a huge part of Tate's identity, but Turner is the most famous British painter in history, and that sort of level of fame and recognition has endured because whilst he was very famous and recognised in his own time, his works are almost timeless. The themes of nature, but also the fact that the way he paints them allows us to imbue them with our own imagination, really does make them timeless and often speak to the future. It's been so fantastic to collaborate with the Grimaldi Forum. Of course, this is a huge Turner exhibition, which would have been very challenging to realise in most spaces, but the cavernous spaces of Grimaldi Forum that have allowed us to do justice to Turner's paintings, but also the installations, which are often large scale. It's been such a privilege, and Grimaldi Forum are so ambitious and hardworking that they've really been able to pull it off.